Afternoon, it's Joyful Christian Hermit. Well, this morning my grandson drove me to the glaucoma doctors, and he noticed that I had much more energy, and that was all it took for me to even seem more capable, because I knew he would report to his mother that I was doing better. And I would prefer that, that people. But then I got home and totally forgot that I had physical therapy a couple hours later. Totally forgot. I got all excited thinking I would tile the laundry room backsplash above the sink and behind the counter and under a cabinet. And so I got some tiles back there, and that's all that happened. Then my back got bad, so I got back down in bed and distracted with news. It was a dumb thing to do. I think it's okay to look at headlines, but I get more distracted because I was tired. I realized my mind didn't even remember it was Thursday. Didn't remember that I had that appointment for my neck and thoracic spine, which would have really helped it, because I was distracting myself so much. But I had neglected this morning. The time got so fast. I had to go early to the doctor's. Took a while through traffic to get there. And I knew I wasn't good enough to drive. And I'd be too hard on me. I'm just not right. I'm just not right still. Balance and everything. Of course, the balance can be from the arachnoiditis, but I realized, I hadn't taken my little morning extended release pain meds. I just took it around 4:30. I'd gone all that time, so no wonder I was tired. I was tired and dozing here, and the dogs are here napping. But then I realized it's the 24th of July. It's St.Sharbel Maklouf's feast day. And then I remembered this. My dear spiritual Da, after he was ordained a priest, I think it was around 1946 or 45, right at the end of the World War II. Must have been 46. Well, I think I think they declared the end of it like in June after the storming of Normandy. So he went to Europe. He went to Lebanon, to Jerusalem, after he was just traveled a little bit before he was sent to be a missionary priest in Cheyenne, Wyoming. In, I think, 1946 was when he went there. So it's probably 1946. Just a couple of weeks before he left, he went to Jerusalem, the Holy Lands, and then to Lebanon. He wanted to see St.Sharbel's hermitage and his monastery, so he went there. And he actually got to go up the mountain to the monastery, or to the little hermitage that belonged to the monastery, and at which Sharbel had spent, I think, 23 years as a hermit, something like that. It's in here somewhere. I have things printed out, but I think it was 19 or 23 years. 23, I think. He was a hermit. He was a monk before then. He didn't become a hermit until I think he was 51 years old. Well, I could figure it out. He died when he was 70. So, maybe 47 years? I'll have to double check. It'll say on this information here. I read a book. It's called The Cedar of Lebanon. The Cedar of Lebanon. It's a biography about him. I've got it on my shelf, and I read it years ago because Father Fahey's his name. He's deceased. he was my dearest spiritual da for many years back in the Midwest, and including when I went to the island. He remained that until he passed. Right after I moved in here, about a month later, after I moved in here, he passed away. The last time I saw him was on the 9th of November, because he knew I would come. He had a very favorite woman saint, Frances Cabrini, and I hadn't seen him in several years. I was out on that island, and he prayed and prayed, and we talked on the phone, and he heard me sobbing around about it. Was a horrible, it was a very hard situation, the island place was, and turning that around and being duped about it and running out of money. He sent me money, and I paid him back that money. But I went to see him, and he had told people, I know she's coming on Mother Cabrini's date. I know it's going to be that day. And it ended up it was that day that I got back there and saw him. And I saw him one more day, and then I never saw him again. And I feel bad. I got firm, because there was another woman who was sort of helping him, but she was always so envious of our relationship. And she was there, and she was like his helper for years. And I was grateful, but she was put on acting strange. She would put on baby talk and make her eyes go funny, like she was tried to be and got so envious. She was reading our mail, what he would write. She would have her mail and letters that I would send. She would read, and she called me because she was angry that he had lent me money, and said that she was in charge of his checkbook, but he didn't want anyone to know. He sent that to me secretly. He said no one was to know. Absolutely not. And it was quite a bit of money. It was people over the years who had given him money. They said if it was for a Catholic in need, and he said, you are in need, and I was. That turning that island place around took everything. All my inheritance that was left, and he took all of that. My eldest daughter ended up paying my last MasterCard bill. I had to put more supplies on it, and then and I paid her back with extra. Everybody I paid with extra. And anyway, but it was, so she was getting funny, even with me visiting, and didn't give us any time alone. She did not. And she kept trying to force a chair on him. He did not want a recliner. He had a chair he liked. And she wanted to spend money on things that he didn't want money spent on. So I was trying to get the money that set up with a man from the Catholic Church who would, was an Edward Jones person and could keep track of that. But Father didn't want to do that. And I said, okay. So I gave him the cash to pay her. Or he says he wanted to give it to her. She had very, very slight cerebral palsy, but she was able to work. In fact, she worked for the convent, got paid, and she worked at nursing homes as like activities director and stuff. But she would, I don't know if it was because she would pull off this goof, and she couldn't be trusted. She would do nasty things. Naughty girl, like naughty girl, naughty women stuff. But she was maybe 6 years younger than me, or 5 years younger. Not that much difference, but tricky woman, but very, very devout. very devout. And I don't know what the thing was. But he told me then, because I got a little bit, I hadn't seen him in years. He was my spiritual father. She knew it. I found out she'd been reading all of our letters back and forth because he was pretty much chair-bound and bed and chair and wheelchair to go in the convent to mass and things. But I didn't appreciate that. And she had called me one time and got real nosy and trying to find out more about the money. And I wouldn't tell her anything. Well, he told me he didn't want anyone to know. I was never to tell anyone. So, he didn't want it around town. He knew it would she would be envious or resentful. And so, but he said to me, he said, well, he wants just to be me and her, he said. Just me and her. And I said, I've known that she's been, and he says, because I did not like how she was sneaking around and also how she was trying to spend his money. Well, he barely had any. In fact, I'd sent him money before because he was the head of that convent wouldn't pay him his salary or anything anymore. And they confiscated his earnings. They did not like him. They did not like priests. Those women didn't. And the convent has since died out. It's over and done. But he says, well, he says, do you think it's something, or do you want to be at me and you? And I just looked at him. How was it was put? Wanted it to be he as her one and only. And he says, well, are you bothered by her and you want that? And I said, look, Jesus is my one and only, and that's who should be your one and only. And it should be hers. But I realize she's not capable. Something's wrong with her, emotionally and psychologically. She was intelligent enough, but she would put on this baby act. In fact, she'd gotten a BA to finish her college degree, BA or something in accounting or at a local college, maybe even a master's. I don't know. I think it was but it was in business or accounting or something. So she was intelligent. It's just some kind of a bizarre, and she'd done it whenever I knew her, all the time I knew her. This strange little act of baby talking and making her eyes sort of go goofy and, like she was having some experience or I don't know, but talking in this, it was just, I think she'd been married but divorced and very, very slight cerebral with her hand or something was a little bit affected from, they thought, lack of oxygen at birth, her hand and arm. And her face, she had a slight lip disfigure, a muscle or something that pulled a little bit. Lovely, and why she would put that on, because other times she would be mature and normal for her age, but, absolutely, I wasn't being part of that, and I hadn't been. I worried that she would spend what little money he had on things he did not want. But I had to drop it and realized, that if that happened, it happened. And then I'd gotten off the island and had the money from that. And of course, if he had needed more, I would have given him. I would make sure he had what he needed. But Oh, oh, Jesus is my one and only. And I made it very clear, and I said, and Jesus is your one and only. None of this goofy stuff. I mean, that was just 7 years ago this November, 6.5 years ago. So, no, that was one time that if it comes down to me and Christ and somebody suggesting anything else is in between, that I don't care who it is. But then things were going not good with my daughter staying there and her husband and stuff, and I had to leave, but she didn't send me my mail. Finally, it was maybe I had that, she sent me finally mail, and there were a couple of letters from my spiritual dad. Notes, he could barely write, apologizing. He was so sorry, and he thought I was upset with him. I had forgotten it. I said what I needed to say, and he needed to hear it, not to get involved in that goofiness of it. Just that. But I realize, I understand. We're old, we get vulnerable. If someone's going to help us, we need help. And she helped him, but she's very territorial and wanted it just to be him and her, and it was weird, unhealthy on her part, very unhealthy. And I guess part of her attachment or her sense of status or whatever it was, but she resented and envied our relationship, and I just wasn't going to have anything of it. I wasn't getting involved in a psychological menage a trois over a 99-plus-year-old priest who was my spiritual father for years, and we were close, and we would always be close, but not in any kind of a sick, immature, non-spiritual way of, I would never dream of reading other people's mail like that, and she'd call me and pump me for info. And my back got so bad then, after I moved in here, my back just really went downhill. I knew I needed surgery. I didn't know how bad it was going to be, and my legs and everything, I could barely walk. And there's no way I could go back for his funeral mass. But I didn't want to deal with her either, and I knew he would understand. She even called me. She did call me. But she would lay it on thick. It was so sick and sad. Anyway, that I feel bad about it, though. And I ended up with a situation where I went that, so I wrote to him as soon as I got those letters and hope that she read them to him. I don't know if she did or not. I don't know, but he knows everything now. And only one time, though, have we seen each other. Was I allowed to see him after he passed, and I was taken to this little hut, and he was brought there. And we couldn't speak, and we couldn't really look at each other. We could see each other. We could not speak or converse. But the love, the spiritual love, was strong between us. It was so wonderful. But I've not seen him since, and I wasn't taken to where he was. I wasn't allowed to see glory. I'm hoping and sure he was in glory. He was the holiest priest, holiest person. A great, great soul, great soul. And I guess he wrote, he says, I guess I found out the wrong thing to bring up to you, to ask you. I should have known, that you would lay out that, no, Jesus is my one and only, and that's all your one and only too. And, I turned the tables on my spiritual father. But years before that, maybe like 5 years before, oh no, it was even more than that, probably 10 years before, I still was in my end of life house. I thought was going to be a nice little house, but where I had the crazy neighbor next door. But he had gotten this. He had actually celebrated Mass in 1946 before he came to the United States, at that little hermitage. There's an altar there, he said, and a shrine. And St.Sharbel was not even, he was a servant of God, but he wasn't canonized yet. And he wasn't even, he was venerable maybe by then, but not a blessed yet, and not a saint yet. But he got this. And this is a little piece, this was touched to St.Sharbel's body. And I'll tell you about St.Sharbel, but it was a cloth that was touched to his body. And his body had this bloody liquid come out of it after he had died. Up until, I think the last time they opened up, well, that still had it was in 1955, so in 1946, this would have been touched to his body with the blood. This a sort of a perfumed blood would flow from his body. And most interesting, but he wanted me to have this because he said he didn't know what he was afraid if he died, what the sisters would do with this relic. That they just toss it out, anything he had out because they didn't like him. They were angry about that women weren't priests. From Vatican II, they had this anger. So that convent had become a dissenting group. Not all of them. There was just a handful, and then they passed away before he did. But he said he was staying there for them, for the ones that it meant something. So they'd have a confessor, and they would have a priest celebrating Mass. Otherwise, the sisters were taking over a lot of the roles that they shouldn't have. But they didn't care. They were dissident. And of course, it fell apart. There's no longer a monastery or a convent. And it's a shame. It's beautiful grounds and buildings, but the town has taken it over for different extended office buildings. And I think they sold the healthcare part. Some place was running it. I think it went out of business, so it's just empty now. But so I said, oh, I've taken care of this. I'll have to make sure that all of my things go to a church or something where people who it means something to, my books, will want. Unless if any of my kids want to sell my books, but something like this needs to be given. And I have a reliquary, too, with a little bit of bone of St. John Nepomucene that I was given by someone once. So, but it doesn't have the papers of authorization with it. Those weren't with it, but it's still very precious, the reliquary. And so St.Sharbel, it's his day today. And I loved him so much. I still do. Read his biography, and there's a movie, I think, on YouTube you can watch, or EWTN, of his life. And I was just so taken by the fact that Father celebrated Mass at the altar in the actual hermitage where he was a hermit. And just being reminded of his life is helping clarify things for me. I'd become very, very coddled. So I need to tighten up my hermit belt and not complain, I'm fighting, I'm fighting against the effects of this septic shock. And this afternoon, just when I distracted and then dozed a lot, I was going to do that tiling and didn't. And I've got to knock off using, like, listening to the news commentators. They're selling, they're selling their station or whatever. And then I kept dozing and I realized I'm tired. It's a big drive wasn't that far, but a lot of traffic going to the eye doctor, and I was there hour and a half about, and I didn't realize they were going to do their annual exam thing with all kinds of different steps to it with my eyeballs. So it was just, I was tired. This septic shock, it's going to take a while. Patience I need. So I have to be realistic. And, I've got a water still doing the tiling, but at least it was a hopeful thing, though, that I wanted to, that I had this vim and vigor in spirit, but was so forgetful and everything that I didn't go to the physical therapist. And actually, it was a site that I was reading that reminded me, the 24th of July, St.Sharbel. He died the 24th of December, but there were so many other saints for that day that they the Roman calendar has him on the 24th. And he's Maronite, so I want to tell you about his life. But I'll just hold this up to my screen, and where's that little thing? And touch you all with that. From touch to his body. And on the island, I'd gotten a little white lab. He was a little tiny one. He's the runt. Because I had it all fenced. I thought, it'd be good to have a dog. And I just knew, I had so much ahead of me with that place. And at that point in time, I didn't think I could do it. I was just going to live there. Just stay in this rat-infested place. And I was so stunned that I got duped like that. But so I got little, and I named him Sharbel. And he was adorable, and he was so smart. I got him when I think he was 6 weeks old. He was just a tiny little thing. And got him early, actually. The guy gave him to me early, was giving all his dogs away. Well, I mean, I had to pay a little, but not much. Beautiful little white lab. And he was toilet trained like in 2 or 3 days and crate trained. He was a smart little dog. But I only had him 5 days. I had not allergies, I thought it was allergies at the time, but I just got worse every day to where I couldn't even, my eyes were red, and water coming down and sneezing and blowing my nose all the time. And it was progressive. So I put an ad, and fortunately I got exactly what I paid for, and they even paid for the toys I'd bought for him. And I gave him the crate. The crate had been given to me. So that's what happened to my little dog, Sharbel. But that's why I had to get these kind of dogs. They're hypoallergenic, so I wouldn't have that problem. So I like Sharbel that much that I wanted to have that reminder of him. But so about his life, he's Lebanese, and he was born on May 8th, 1828, and he died December 24th, 1898. And his birth name was Yosef Anton Maklouf, but he took the name Sharbel, who was on further down in this, a 2nd century martyr. And he's very well known among the Lebanese Christians as the miracle monk of Lebanon. And because you can receive many favors through his prayer for you, you ask him. Many favors, especially if you are praying to God at his tomb. and then stand at his tomb and ask him for help, also for favors, they call it. And that tomb is at the monastery of St. Maron in Anaya, Lebanon. He was beatified in 1965, so that would be about 20 years after my spiritual dad was there, celebrating Mass at his hermitage. And he was canonized in 1977. And both the beatification and the canonization were by Pope Paul VI. Now, the Latin Church, we do July 24th, but the Maronite Church celebrates him on the third Sunday of July. So that would have been last Sunday. What was that? Maybe the 19th or something. So he was born one of 5 children in a little mountain village called Beka Kafra. It's in the highest elevation in Lebanon. His father was a mule driver, and he died in August of 1831. So Sharbel was only 3 years old when his father died. And he died returning from something to do, some battle or something with the Turkish army. Or maybe it was a practice corvée, it says here. I don't know what that is. But he left his wife, Brigitte, and who was a widow then, to care for their 5 children. They had 5 children. And he was obviously one of the younger ones, probably the next to the youngest, because he was 3. She remarried a man who went on to holy orders. He became a parish priest. The Maronites can be married, the priests can be married. But they are part of the Latin Church. They're a rite within the Latin Church. There's like 22 rites, or several years ago there were 22, maybe there's more now, different rites within the Western Church. So his stepfather became the parish priest there in Baka, Kafra, and so Sharbel, his name was Joseph was, as a child, was raised in this very pious home. And he was drawn to the lives of the saints and also to the eremitical life, the hermit life, because 2 of his uncles practiced hermit life. They were hermits. As a young boy, he was responsible for his family's small herd of cows. So he had built a shrine out in the hills where he would take the cows and he would pray while he was, making sure they were okay, getting their grass and everything. And he had an icon there of the Virgin Mary at his shrine or grotto that he went to. But he would spend the day in prayer. In 1851, he left his family. He was about 23 then. And he began training to be a monk in the Lebanese Maronite order at the monastery of Our Lady in Mayfuk. He later transferred to the monastery of St. Maron, Maronite, in Anaya. And he received his habit, and he took the religious name Sharbel. As I said, it was after the second century Christian martyr of Antioch, named Sharbel. And he made his final religious profession in the order of St. Maron, Maronite order, November 1st, 1853. So then he went on to get ordained. So that happened in 1859 when he was ordained, because he began to study for those 6 years philosophy and theology at the monastery of St. Cyprian and Justina, also in Lebanon, called Justina in Lebanon. So let's see, 1859, he would have been 31 years old. No, 33, I think. 59. No. 31. He's born in 1828. So he was 31 years old. In 1875, it talks here as a young monk, he was very devout. He lived a life of asceticism. He went back to that after his studies, and after he was ordained, he went back to the monastery of St. Maron. And but in 1875, how old would he have been? 50, would have been 47 years old. That's how old I was when I became a hermit. I kept thinking he was 51, but he was 47, same age. So got a connection with them now. So he went to the hermitages, the monastery's hermitage. They had a little hermitage, and it was called the Hermitage of Saints Peter and Paul. It was a chapel under the care of the monastery up in the mountains further up from the monastery. Monastery's already pretty far up. But he spent the next 23 years there living alone until his death from a stroke on December 24th, 1898. So he was interred at the monastery of St. Maron on Christmas Day that year. And it was reported, and I read this in his biography too, that when they were transporting his corpse to the monastery, it was terrible snow that night. The weather conditions were terrible, and it hindered the pallbearers. It says here, Father Sharbel died on the eve of Christmas. The snow was heavy. We transferred him to the monastery on Christmas Day. Before we moved him, the snow was falling rapidly and the clouds were very dark. When we carried him, though, the clouds disappeared and the weather cleared. That was a testimony and signed by one of the pallbearers, George Emmanuel Abisassin. So, and then this is another thing that happened then. After a few months past his death, a bright light started shining. They could see it at night coming from the grave. And it kept up every single night for quite a while. And it was surrounding his tomb. It was just a simple little grave, or simple tomb. Not the typical. I think it was more of a tomb that they could open up, but they did. Finally, the superiors went and exhumed, opened the tomb, and they found that his body was still intact. And that can happen with some people. They have found that a lot of Teresa of Avila's body is still intact after 470 years or something. So, not quite, would be, or maybe it's 500 years now. So, but the unusual thing is after that day that they opened up the tomb and saw a blood-like liquid flowed from his body. So that's what this was touched to. Father told me it had been touched to this liquid, this blood-looking liquid. It wasn't blood, though. Experts and doctors were unable to give medical explanations for his incorruptibility, and he had very flexible, as if he was, a body asleep. In 1950, then, in 1952, some 50 years later or more, his tomb was open and his body still had that appearance of a living person. A 1950 television tape of its exhumation showed Maklouf's body still intact despite the grave having become severely rusty. And the official site mentions, in this century, His grave has been opened 4 times, and that would have been in the 20th century, the 1900s. 4 times, the last time being in 1955, and each time it has been noticed that his bleeding body still has its flexibility as if it were alive. And it quotes the Catholic Tradition website also. Father Joseph Maklouf, the postulate, or Father Joseph Mahfouz, not St.Sharbel Maklouf, but Father Joseph Mahfouz, the postulator of the cause of, trying to get him canonized, certified that in 1965, the body of St.Sharbel was still preserved intact with no alteration. In 1976, he again witnessed the opening of the grave. This time, the body was completely decomposed. Only the skeleton remained. On September 2nd, 2017, what would that be? 8 years ago, this coming September, St.Sharbel's relics were moved to St. Elizabeth Cathedral in Kosice, Slovakia, where a monthly pilgrimage is held, called Putkavi Sharbel, Pilgrimage to St.Sharbel, it's called in English. The cathedral is the first in Slovakia to receive his official relics from Lebanon, and it attracts pilgrims from across the country, as well as neighboring states like Poland, Ukraine, and Czech Republic. So, his veneration. The cause for Sharbel Maklouf's beatification was opened on April 4th, 1929. So that would have been 31 years after his passing. He was granted the title of Servant of God. That's how it goes in this particular order. On December 5th, 1965, Pope Paul VI presided over his beatification on the conclusion of the Second Vatican Council. And I don't know, maybe back then they didn't have venerable. See, they have servant of God, now they have venerable, beatified, blessed, and then saint. And maybe, I think it goes in that order. Or maybe if you're a servant of God, you're called venerable. I'm a little rusty here on that, but so this is what the Pope said when he was beatified, Pope Paul VI. A hermit of Mount Lebanon is enrolled in the number of the blessed. A new eminent member of monastic sanctity has, by his example and his intercession, enriched the entire Christian people. May he make us understand, in a world largely fascinated by wealth and comfort, the paramount value of poverty, penance, and asceticism, to liberate the soul in its ascent to God. On October 9th, 1977, that same Pope, Paul VI, canonized Maklouf. And at the time, Bishop Francis Zayak wrote, St.Sharbel, spelled with a CH or an SH, it just depends, is called the second St. Anthony of the desert, the perfume of Lebanon, the first confessor of the East to be raised to the altars according to the actual procedure of the Catholic Church, the honor of our Aramaic Antiochian Church, and the model of spiritual values and renewal. Sharbel is like a cedar of Lebanon, standing in eternal prayer on top of a mountain. So reflecting on the canonization of Maklouf and the causes for canonization of other Mennonites active at the time, this Father Zayak, or Bishop Zayak, further proclaimed the Aramaic Maronite Antiochian Church is indeed a living branch of the Catholic Church and is intimately connected with the trunk, who is Christ, our Savior, the beginning and the end of all things. So, as a Maronite saint then, along with his piety and his morals, Maklouf serves as a role model for many Maronite Catholics, plus is venerated by Catholics from all churches in communion with Rome. And I suspect even people in the Eastern Church, the Eastern Orthodox, there's many Eastern Orthodox holy people that we admire and read about and ask them to pray for us and learn about their lives and emulate, imitate, try to learn from them. And the same with Maklouf from other areas. Of the world. Holy is holy is holy. On October 28th, 2017, a shrine dedicated to Maklouf, Sharbel Maklouf, was inaugurated at St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City. The Lebanese Maronite Patriarch, Bakara Batrus Arahi, attended the inauguration ceremony, giving his blessing and a dedication, as well as Cardinal Timothy M. Dolan. The shrine in New York City at St. Patrick's has a mosaic of Maklouf, along with the national emblems of Lebanon, such as the cedar and a relic of Maklouf. It was donated by a certain bank chairman in the name of his parents. So, let's see what we've got. We've got different dates and things. Miracles. There were many miracles attributed to Sharbel Maklouf. It's different names here that were healed, people healed, some miracles. Many, many miracles since his death. Here's one, most famous, is that of Nohad El-Shami, a 55-year-old woman in Lebanon, who, at the time of the miracle, was healed from partial paralysis. On the night she was healed, she relates the story that she dreamt of two Maronite monks standing next to her bed. One put his hands on her neck and operated on her, relieving her from her pain, while the other held a pillow behind her back. When she awoke, she was completely healed and recovered her ability to walk. She believed it was the saint who healed her, but did not recognize the other monk. The next night, she dreamt of Maklouf, who said, "I did this surgery to let people see and return to faith." And he asked them to return to the hermitage, where Sharbel spent 23 years of his life, end of his life. They did, I'm not sure. One thing I read was that he was brought back to the monastery and died a couple of days later after having had a stroke, but I'm not sure. I think so, though. I think it got too cold and too austere up in the mountains further up. So his brothers, friars, brought him back to the monastery to die the last 2 days of his life. So there were two wounds in this one woman's neck, Nohad El-Shami, and this woman, though, woke up and found that she was completely healed and had recovered her ability to walk, thanks to the prayers and intercessions of St.Sharbel Maklouf. And this woman thought it was Sharbel who had healed her, but he didn't recognize the other monk. And the very next night, she dreamed of Maklouf, who said, "I am the saint," or I did the surgery on her neck, to let people see and return to faith. And he asked them to visit the hermitage on the 22nd of every month of the year. And people now gather on the 22nd of each month to pray and attend Mass in the hermitage of St.Sharbel. they call it, the St.Sharbel hermitage in Anaya. So here's another miracle. A man named Raymond Nader in 1994 was praying at the hermitage. 94 would have been about 50 years after my spiritual father went to that hermitage to pray and to celebrate Mass at that altar. He said he found myself in another world. I saw a strange and amazing light, unlike any light I had ever seen. It was a sea of light that extended from one end of the universe to the other. I wanted that light to stay permanently. And that was a vision that this man, Raymond Nader, had experienced. Nader was leaving when his arm felt hot and itchy near the statue of St.Sharbel. And this has happened before. When he rolled up his sleeve in his car, he saw the imprint of 5 fingers that had grabbed his arm. And made these red marks of his fingers. And it was St.Sharbel grabbing him, reaching him. You must do this, And that happened also. It was on EWTN, I remember years ago. A man from Lebanon. And maybe it was the same man. But he talked about how Sharbel appeared and grabbed his arm with this, like from this direction. And they showed it on TV. These big finger marks, red, that were on the man's arm. They stayed there. The saint, though, the one man was going to go on and do something else, come to the United States and do something in journalism. But Sharbel said, no, go back, stay in Lebanon and be a journalist, help, proclaim the gospel. And so this young man did. Well, I think we'd do something too if Sharbel appeared and took a grip on our arms and had this big red marks where his hands had been, his fingers. And they showed too. They weren't just off and on. In this man given here, the one from Lebanon who had it, or this other man here, this plastic surgeon he was from Beirut, that burn of his fingerprints came and went off and on. But with the journalist who was interviewed on EWTN years ago, that stayed permanently on his arm where St.Sharbel had grabbed hold of him, had a job for him, had a mission for him. So, and St.Sharbel appeared many more times to this man and to this Nader. His name was Nader, Nader. And his locutions, his words that Sharbel would speak to him have been published. I don't know where, but they might be in some of this is from Wikipedia, from the different references and things and external links. There might be a copy of those that you could find. So anyway, I find it fascinating. These are just external links and different feast days and different miracles. I've been over those other things as the miracles and things, but there's lots now more. He's a saint now, and there's many more writings about him. Fascinating saint. And what's impressing me this day, and going out to the dusty living room and stepping over some different building supplies, get to the mantle to find this. And I had written on the back of this, Father of truth, behold your Son, atoning victim. Behold his blood, which intercedes for me. Receive my offering. I think that might have been something a quote from Sharbel. I just wrote it down in the little black print down wrote in my own handwriting. And somebody else had written this up here. I think whoever made this icon that Father got at his hermitage wrote this. Aramaic icon depicting our Lord and the four evangelists, but it's not on this. I think what this is my spiritual father put his relic onto this to be able to hang on his wall. But I had written this, some quote or a prayer that St.Sharbel had said, and I wrote it on this to be with this. This other writing doesn't have anything to do with St.Sharbel's relic. Father put the relic on it to hang it. Somebody else had probably given him one of the four evangelists, an icon that they had on this humble little piece of wood. So, what I'm understanding, God is trying to help me. God is trying to help you. He's trying to help all of us. And I'm seeing and understanding patience with my health. And of course, it doesn't matter, when God takes me, he takes me. What matters to me is that I do what God wants of me while I'm here, and that I prepare and end out my natural life as a good hermit, and in doing right, and in steeping myself in holiness, close to God, praising him, smiling. So, and not worrying about, I'd gotten so paranoid and so concerned. And, of course, I don't want more pain. No one wants more pain, especially if you have arachnoiditis or if you have other horrible ailments that many of you have. Somebody mentioned the polymyalgia, nerve pain all over several places. So, we all have sufferings. And I think I let this experience and just, get to me too much. The hospitalization, the ICU, and being worn out now from this septic shock. It's just how it is. It's going to take time. Maybe tomorrow I can do some tiling. Maybe not. At least I got them out there and I cleared off some things that were on that. Moved them into the kitchen. I've got to find a place for some of this stuff. And, there's shelf lining and things. I could use it up, put it in the bathroom, or use it in the rest of the utility shelves or something, or in drawers or something. So, but I have to just focus on God. And I was reminded, because I used to be very ascetic. And that broke me in a sense. It broke me from attachment to foods or things. But as I'd mentioned before, when you really, really, really detach, it doesn't matter. So I don't have fancy food. I don't have appetite. It doesn't matter. But I no longer need to do extreme asceticism to break myself from attachment. Like I said the other day, I have other attachments like light and looking out on a view. And I thought today, too, was part of my frustration or my resistance, partly to do with that it wasn't my idea. It wasn't my timing. My daughter brought it up when I was still in the hospital. Well, I think she called me. I'd just gone to the rehab. And she didn't know I was going to do better. And it doesn't matter. It's so much close to God is what I need. And virtues and learning from people like this, from St.Sharbel. This here it's spelled with an S, Sharbel. I tend to spell it with the CH, but this is more the Lebanese way. But no, it's letting God lead, and letting go, dying to self, following Christ. He spoke not, he opened not his mouth. Stop my complaining and my any kind of paranoia that's coming up. It's leaving, it's starting to leave. And the floor, tile over concrete. However, God will handle it. God will handle it. It doesn't matter. I have plenty of pain. It's how it goes. So just going to sort of let God choose, and it'll be okay. And if it's too hard on my back, my daughter cares. She'll make some arrangement. She'll bring those gym pads in. We're going to try that. Not right now. I will need a ride there. I realize I can't drive far on my own. Not in traffic. I'll probably, try to get another watermelon before long. I still have one that Sean's grandmother bought me. So I'll eat that up. I want to get more chicken bouillon, these, big cartons that Costco has at a good price. And I'll get my gas filled. I try to do that. And if there's anything else that I could have to stock up on that would be good to eat, maybe some cantaloupe, those are healthy. And more of the mashed potatoes. You can make your own. I used to make my own, but standing like that I'm not going to do things that are going to aggravate. Now doing the countertops, I'll have to lean sort of forward, and I'll probably lean down to put the adhesive on the back, or I like to. It's called back buttering, where you put a thin coat on your wall or whatever you put the tile on, or the floor if you're doing tile floors, and then you back butter a light coat onto the actual tile you're putting on. And this tile isn't heavy, but it's on a square foot sheet. But part of them I have to cut it in half. It'll fit just right where I need to put it. So it's going to be a very simple backsplash job. I don't have to do much at all. Very little cutting. But my grandson carried the saw to the back patio this morning when he brought me back home from the eye doctor. And good news at the eye doctor. It's getting worse, the glaucoma, but it's not. It's a usual drop, like for any person. It's not anything excessive. So all I got to do is scratch myself because it feels like spiders and bugs are crawling on me. That's the arachnoiditis. So I just do that automatically. A lot of times my head looks like I have lice. So all that stuff is just automatic what I do now, and I'm just explain every now and then so you aren't wondering why do I scratch myself. Some of you have followed the videos know, but new people won't, and it doesn't matter. But we're curious about things, and that's okay. And here's Sharbel, though. Sharbel Maklouf. His first name was Joseph Anton. His father was Anton also. So his austerity, he would not be. This is interesting for people, when people are young and they think, oh, I want to be a hermit. Like the one bishop in the Midwest who canonically approved he only knew her 3 months, didn't really know her. Just her priest presented her to him. But she was from a big influential family. And he made her a diocese hermit. She was like 23 years old. hadn't ever worked. She went to college, traveled with a family friend priest to Russia, and then that's where she became enamored with the idea of being a hermit, of all things. She loved children, and she'd never worked. She'd never had any real, close boyfriend. Not wasn't ever engaged or anything like that. So hadn't had that experience yet, and lived at home. It was just really the most ridiculous thing. And I think that bishop learned, because she didn't last a year, not a year. And at the big ceremony, big article, oh, the first one in this diocese. And no, it wasn't the first hermit in the diocese, but I never said anything, But their first diocese, he thought it was. And it was a diocese one. He wanted to do some. He wanted to come in. We'd had an old bishop there a long time, and he wanted to show he was doing things. He was forward and active, but just didn't stop to think. And he didn't know much about hermits. And she lived at home with her mom and dad, and her nieces and nephews would come over, and she'd have parties for them, and would go help at their schools. And that's not hermit life, but she wore a habit, a very austere one, and I think maybe went barefoot or just sandals. So had that outer part, but didn't have the solitude nor the silence. Not a lot, but look at me. I was listening to people talk about this man who died. Some big trend in the 80s or 90s, Hulk Hogan. Sounds like a wonderful man, though. Very generous, very kind, and helped many people. But see, that's where I think, for me, I always say, well, it's okay to do headlines, but don't list these commentators it's a business, and then they have all their ads. They're getting viewers and more clicks, and that's not hermit. In fact, I know of some hermits they're dead saints. Trying to think of the name. He was in the 1930s. He never even looked at a newspaper. Not at all. He stayed totally away from any news of the temporal world. Well, I want to know. I like to pray for the world. But, see, I could have been doing other things. I could have been actually taking a nap instead of dozing. Or I could have been pondering Maklouf. But see, asceticism. I used to be more strict in that, and I've gone soft. I mean, the suffering I do is far worse, but that's from God. That's not me making myself suffer. And, if the townhome and the tile and the concrete is excruciating or something, in humility, I know my limits of what I can take pain-wise at this point. And God will help me, but God isn't in the business of wanting us to create or to put ourselves in situations that will cause us more physical pain when we already have more than we can handle. So see, I cannot do that. That would be immoral in a way, and spiritually immature and unthinking, not right, sort of sick. But what God allows us is another thing, and minor, yes, to learn to cope. But I'll find out. My daughter has a mat she's going to bring to her townhome. They're busy right now, but then if she can pick me up, so I can't drive in the traffic. I'll give it a try. Stand on it. I'll just walk in circles on it. She says it's not very big, the one she'll bring. Maybe I could get her to bring two, and I could walk back and forth a little and just see how it does. But my back hurts here standing up. That's why I keep flopping back on the bed. So, if what we can't take, but it was wonderful to think. I think God was giving me just a bit of zeal and hopefulness that I wanted to do that little task today of putting the tile on that wall. I could have done it easily in an hour or two. It's not a big space, including the cutting, but I was tired. So, but I'm going to ask St.Sharbel for guidance more openly and readily. And he's got discipline. I lack discipline, I think. At this point especially, I was far more disciplined before when I was more first a hermit. Well, of course, I was, in part, it can be a little bit of pride or wanting to impress your own self with how austere you can be and all that. And I realized God knows, just be myself. Just be myself. He knows how I am, and just keep trying to improve. Don't try to impress yourself early on as a hermit with, being austere, and you can get really into pride that way. And, putting on, I wore a gray jumper at first, well, after I'd been in this one community, and learned even with a gray jumper, with the sameness of it and the austerity of it, people thought I was something, but then got the wrong idea because they couldn't figure out what kind of an outfit it was, so it was more misleading and it was more drawing attention to myself. So just wearing regular clothes, things that look okay together and aren't going to stand out as mismatched or out of sync with the flow of people out there. Pass unnoticed. That was a motto of a saint sister years that I learned of many years ago when I was first becoming Catholic. I read some biography. I don't even remember what saint it was, but her motto was to pass unnoticed. Oh. And you don't pass unnoticed where you're wearing a religious habit that's based off of Franciscans or Benedictine or something out of the Middle Ages, which the habits are, the ones that people wear, that stand out to us. And that's a religious sister or brother. But no, if you're a hermit, there's no reason to be wearing a habit. Especially if you're a diocese hermit, because you've already had your name broadcast all over, probably articles written. It becomes pride and wanting people to know and to esteem you as special. And then you have carte blanche to teach or to work at parishes or chaplain in hospitals because you look so official to those who don't know that hermits would be the last person to be drawing attention to themselves. Look at him. And he was in a religious order and stayed up in a hut. But other of his brothers were envious. I mean, they he went up, he asked his superior, and his superior approved him to go. His superior knew him well. So some of the others, we'd like to do that. We want to be hermits, younger ones. And the superior said, well, no. Anyone who is a hermit must be advanced in years, advanced in prayer, and experienced in suffering, and able to live a life in solitude and in more hardship. Because it is more hardship living alone. Well, see, when you get older, I have to, accept help. I have to open up a little more. And even in that, the grandma wanted to take my trash cans in today. She said, got this text, I'll be over at 8:30. Take your trash cans back up the garage. Well, I said, well, I took them out last night and I'll bring them back up. My grandson offered, oh, Gaga, I'll take these up for you. I said, no. I said, you'll understand this because he's getting things about me. I said, I need that as a little challenge. And the dogs and I will come out and get one, and we'll come out and get another, and be a little exercise for us, and not hard, not over the top. Like if I were going to say I'm going to go out and dig up the rest of the dead roses. I'm not talking Silas Marner, he's blooming even. So that's the ones I was getting rid of that had weren't blooming anymore. They had gone into reversion. So yeah, so it, his superior knew what he was doing with hermits, Sharbel's superior, and he explained it to the other monks. And he said you should be in midlife, around 50 or more. And I gave you the example of the young woman who, and it wasn't even a thing that she could succeed at. She was missing solitude. And this same bishop then turned around and did two women that were good friends. One had become a widow, the other one was divorced. They were friends. And they lived together in the one woman's home. That's not solitude. It just isn't. And there's a difference. Those of you who are alone, widowed, or widowers, or in whatever way it is, and have been, you know the opportunity is ripe and very good for closeness to God. But of course, you have more social life probably if you're not a hermit, and you should, if your vocation is otherwise. But living alone teaches us things regardless. Just being alone all night and being sick alone, having suffering and being alone, humanly alone, I'm talking, it makes a difference. The responsibilities and who you turn to. You're not turning to another person. You're always turning to God first. At least I find that to be the case. And then other people, though, because of this, so actually I've thought, it might be better to have a new location. Maybe that's why God moves me on every 5 to 6 years. 6 years, usually it's been 1 year. One time it was 7 years. Because people get to know me and they help me and all, but it takes away a lot of the solus deus, God alone, and my letting God provide. And God does with these other people, but it becomes them then wanting, which is lovely. But I have found with older people in particular, people older than me, that they, and of course my daughter, but she hasn't seen me in quite a while. And she thought she had seen me in ICU and then just briefly in the hospital before she had to leave for over a week. And then she was gone again another week. So she hasn't seen that I'm getting better. So that's why she came up with, well, it's time for us, we should trade now, to make it easier for yourself. And in that sense, yes, I'm ready. But I would like to, I'm thinking even if we could work on this together to finish it. I would like the enforced build-up. I need to do something to build my body up, or I won't do well there either. See? And then I won't have neighbors to help me if I need help with something. And not neighbors that I know. And go through the whole thing. And I would as soon not have to get too involved with neighbors. Because I know I'm all the more, Sharbel is this today is breaking through even. God wants me all the more his hermit, and into the ascetic spiritual life, and my renovating as far as being my too much focus. And I'm going to have to be really strict on, like when I was in the hospital and stuff, I wasn't, even after my grandson brought me my laptop, I wasn't interested in the world news. But there today I was listening to commentators talk, and they're trained. They're entertainers in a way, news entertainers, and they keep feeding, and then you're just, an hour is gone of what, A headline would have told me, and a paragraph would have told me of this wonderful man who died, and who I guess children and kids looked up to, and this power man, sort of a Superman type figure or something, wrestler or something. So yeah, he made wrestling become a big sport again, and it's good for a lot of kids. Wrestling is a good sport. A lot of young boys, girls too, wrestle at schools for competition, and they can get a lot of anxiety out that way too. It can be just their right sport for them. So anyway, God bless his real presence in us, and thank you, St.Sharbel. Thank you, Father Fahey, for entrusting me with this special, very old. He was, well, what would 1946 be? 60, 70 some years, 80 years, I think. Yeah. So grateful for it. No, it's an object, but it has meaning, and it has DNA, has Sharbel's DNA on it. And that special bloody liquid wasn't actual blood, it was analyzed. It wasn't pure blood, it wasn't, and I think it had a scent to it. And the light that came from his grave kept shining every night, no matter what kind of weather, until the superior checked it out, had his tomb opened, exhumed, and opened up to see what was going on. So he's a miraculous, saintly person, and I'm going to call upon him to pray for me, to ask favors of Jesus for me. And I share his love of Mary and any number of saints, and I appreciate that he took the name of a martyr, because a lot of the martyrs are forgotten. They lived, not long lives in general. Most of them were martyred when they were young men and women. So they would not denounce Christ. Christ was their one and only. And my spiritual dad knew immediately. He did. He said, that's right to me. He says, I know that. But since I didn't write to him, I got so involved in the other hassles I was in at that time that I should have written to him. And then thankfully I got the mail sent to me and wrote immediately. I don't care. I just hope she did read it to him, though. Well, he knows now. It's okay. Don't go back over these things. Okay. And God bless you all. God love you all. And praise God for all these holy people we have to learn from, and to pray for us and to help us by their lives, to get answers for our own lives and direction for our own lives. God speaks through them.